All right, this morning we're going to be in Romans 1. Len is on a brief vacation in the middle of a lengthy series on 1st and 2nd Samuel. And unless you've taught for, 10, 15, 20 weeks like Len has, and before Bart showed up, Len was teaching 50 weeks a year. You need a vacation now and then. Okay, so he asked me a couple of weeks ago if I would fill in for him just for this one lesson. He said I could teach anything I want. So you guys are in trouble. But it's a lesson that I've been thinking about for a long, since I did the Judges series. I've been thinking about that for a long time. And I thought, well, I've only got 1 week to do this. This is probably the week to do it. So we're going to be in Romans 1. We talk about God's love and grace and mercy all the time. And I'm not asking you to not dwell on that. It's how we should live our lives out. It's how we should treat others the same way. But we don't often think about God's wrath. And so we're going to have some fun today talking about God's wrath in Romans 1. So let's get started. Bart's going to do the reading for me here. Bart, if you would read Romans 1:18.
For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness.
Now, teaching about God's wrath, that's not usually a popular topic. For you guys who are just visiting the first time today, welcome. We're going to talk about wrath today. But it's not necessarily part of the gospel. It's why the gospel is so necessary. Okay, it is great news. Paul's goal is not to proclaim the good news, but to demonstrate the absolute necessity of salvation. And the wrath of God, it's revealed in the gospel, but in fact, it's a human experience. Let's see if this works. And there's different kinds of wrath. We're going to go through a few of those. First, there's eternal wrath. We all know what that is, right? Big lake of fire, hell. No one even likes to say the word hell anymore. Okay, so that's one. Then there's, anybody know how to pronounce that word? Eschatological wrath. What is that? End times wrath. Bart's taught on that a number of times in here. Cataclysmic wrath. Events like 9/11, hurricanes, tsunamis, those kind of, where God takes his hand off of a society sometimes. Now, sometimes you can read too much into that, but that is a fact. Consequential wrath. I saw this term and I thought it was really interesting. It is the sowing and reaping of consequences of your actions and decisions. Okay, so God didn't necessarily have to do anything special on consequential wrath. You did it yourself, with the decisions that you make. And the last one, this is the one we're going to talk about mainly today. The wrath of abandonment. Okay, and I think you know where I'm probably headed with in Romans, where God departs. And to give you again, and this is the tie-in with Judges. There's a great illustration in Judges 16. If you want to follow along, I'll have Bart read 16:18 to 21.
When Delilah saw that he had told her all that was in his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up once more, for he has told me all that is in his heart." And then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep on her knees and called for a man that had him shave off the 7 locks of his hair.
Now, you guys remember earlier, this happened several times. Remember the story on Samson? And she would do that, thinking she's got all the info on him, and he would just shake off. They would come in and he would just shake them off, okay? Not so this time. Go ahead, Bart.
Then she began to afflict him, and his strength left him. She said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. And then the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes, and they brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze chains, and he was a grinder in the prison.
A grinder, you know what that is? He took the place of a mule. This is a job for a mule. And they gouged his eyes out. And if you remember when we did that series on Samson, I thought it was interesting that the first thing they did when they got him was they gouged his eyes out, because the very thing that got Samson in trouble was his eyes. So because of his sin, God departed from him. God abandoned him at that point, and he didn't even know it. You think we live in a world that has that same lack of knowledge? And then Bart, let's read a couple other verses here.
Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore, I will no longer deliver you. Go, cry out to the gods that you have chosen and let them deliver you in the time of your distress.
Remember that in Judges? They got in trouble again and again and again. They abandoned God. Okay, and they would cry out to God, and then he would come rescue them. But at some point, God's had enough. And you see that a couple of times in Judges. Go ahead and read that Proverbs. This one, if you haven't read this before, this Proverbs scripture, you almost have to laugh a little bit, but don't think that God doesn't have a sense of humor, and don't think that God isn't serious when he makes some of these statements. Bart, go ahead and read chapter 1, 24 to 31.
Because I called and you refused, I stretched out my hand and no one paid attention, and you neglected all my counsel and did not want my reproof. I will also laugh at your calamity, will mock when your dread comes like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. Then they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they shall not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord.
That's a scary proverb, isn't it? What's he telling them? You've abandoned me. You've honored other gods and idols. Do we do that? Idols for sure. It may not be as blatant as other gods in some cases, but idols for sure. And at some point, God is going to say, I'm done, and I'm going to laugh and mock your calamity. That's kind of the consequential wrath. I'm going to laugh at it when that happens to you. And then in Hosea 4:17, it's recorded that God said, Ephraim has joined unto idols, let him alone. Abandoned, I'm done. At some point, that's a scary thought, isn't it? That at some point, God will just say, I'm done. I've tried, I've brought all these different things into your life to try to get your attention, but I'm done. That's a scary thought. To me, that's one of the scariest things in Scripture. There comes a time where God will abandon man. It's frightening to think about that, though. It's frightening to think you might be abandoned by God. The opportunity for salvation is past. Think about that. We're living in those times. If we don't have a sense of urgency for family and friends that are not saved, we should, because this time is quickly approaching. And I'll show you here in a little bit. I think it's upon us now as a society. C.S. Lewis, everybody, I know Alvin reads C.S. Lewis. If you read C.S. Lewis, read the book 6 or 7 times and have a dictionary nearby, okay? He uses words we don't always typically use these days. In his book, The Problem of Pain, he said, the lost enjoy forever the horrible freedom they have demanded and are therefore self-enslaved. Alvin.
Interesting is that he mentions Ephraim particularly, and the reason why is because Ephraim was a princely tribe. It was a tribe of the people who had the most education. They were the leaders. They were the people who had it all together. And that's a danger, because when you think that you've got it all together and you decide to forsake God, let me tell you, you have just invited a whirlwind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's something we shouldn't take lightly. So just what is the abandoning act on God's part? Mark.
He takes his hands off. He lets you hang yourself.
Yeah,
Really.
it's the removal of restraining grace. Karen.
I can give you what you want. That's
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about that. Think about if you let your children just do whatever they want. That would be a calamity in itself, would it not? I mean, and it starts early. My daughter's got a 5-year, right? She's got a 5-year-old. And I tell you what, you talk about a strong-willed little girl, when she wants something, I mean, she is relentless at it. And imagine what would happen if you gave it to her all the time. Tony,
More assertive than that and even lead us into deception. I remember King Ahaz, when all the prophets said, yeah, go ahead, fight the enemy. But Micaiah said, no, if you go to fight the enemy, you're going to be defeated. And God, it says in there that God chose them to believe the other prophets. So in that deception, they went into war. Of course, God beat, just like Micaiah had said. Sometimes God will even come against us
yeah,
and lead us into deception to our own destruction.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, it's again, you're seeing some themes from Judges. All these concepts and everything happen in Judges again and again. But no scripture directly confronts the abandonment quite like Romans 1. It's the most graphic, most comprehensive discussion of what it means to be abandoned by God. And it's the best passage that I know to explain the moral chaos and confusion. And I think that's going on in our society today. Talking about moral chaos, yes, and confusion. It's crazy. We'll get into some of the truth aspects of this here in just a bit. And we're currently experiencing this. Whether society realizes it or not, we're currently experiencing this. Go down to verse 24. Verse 24, it says, God gave them over. Verse 26, God gave them over. In the middle of verse 28, God gave them over. What does that mean? God gave them over. Well, in the Greek, there's a term, it's called paradidomai. And it has a judicial sense to it. It can be used as a judgment made on a criminal or somebody handed over for punishment. That's what gave them over actually means. Each of these phrases expresses the fact that the wrath of God has acted judiciously and is sentencing sinners. It's God officially giving them over. It's God letting them go uninterrupted with their decisions. Consequential wrath comes into this as well. Look at the 3 sins that Paul refers to in these passages. And we're talking about Paul here in a minute too, in the time that he wrote this. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. You could summarize probably all of the problems with society today is exactly that. They've exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And we'll get into that a little more too. It's not just a lie, it's the lie. The lie is essentially idolatry, which puts us in the place of God. What happened in the garden? What did Satan say to Eve? Did he really say that? He knows, because if you eat of the tree, he'll know you'll be like God. That's the lie. And we're going to look at some other things on that as well, but it's a lie. And you think about some of the things we're going to talk about, you'll see that people have swallowed the lie, hook, line, and sinker. What was Israel's sin again and again in Judges? Idolatry, worshiping false gods. But the one that gets me, because it's in there a bunch of times, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Well, it's today, boy, amen to that. You ain't kidding. So it first says, so God gave them over to their vile passions. Paul wrote this in the city of Corinth, and every sort of sexual immorality and ritualistic prostitution was practiced freely in Corinth. This was the Las Vegas of their time on steroids. It was really nasty. And the terminology in Romans 1:24 refers to the combination of sexual immorality and idolatrous worship. And this begins a passage where Paul describes sin and corruption of the pagan world with amazing directness. A lot of people don't like to read Romans 1. It is very, very direct. And if any of you have friends or family that practice homosexuality, this is really uncomfortable. You know, the first chapter of this letter it's a dreadful portion of the Word of God. This is what Spurgeon says. This is Charles Spurgeon, one of my heroes. Okay, that's why I smoke cigars, because Spurgeon did. Recording it. The first chapter of the Epistle of Romans is a dreadful portion of the Word of God. I should hardly like to read it all through aloud. It is not intended to be used. Read it at home and be startled by the awful vices of the Gentile world. That's Spurgeon. He wouldn't even preach about it because it was so awful to preach about. And it goes on, it says the women exchanged, for even women exchanged the natural use. Paul's using homosexuality both in female and male expressions. He doesn't use the normal words for man or woman. He uses the words male and female. Why do you think he would do that? He created them, male and female. He uses categories to describe sexuality outside of human terms, because that type of sin describes outside of human dignity. And Paul categorizes this whole section under the idea of vile passions. Think about it. If you're going to talk to one of your friends who's having a problem, you just tell them they got a vile passion and they need to fix that. That ain't going to work. That ain't going to work. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And interestingly, I hadn't thought about this until I actually read this. Sin is both the cause and the effect in that sin. Think about that. The sin itself is the cause and the effect. Sin is the reason and sin is the result. I want you to notice the wrath of abandonment and its progression. It'll help us understand why I say we're experiencing not only in America, but in the world, particularly in the Western world. Again, look at verse 24. When the wrath of abandonment goes into action, this wrath, which is defined by God giving them over, follows 3 steps. It follows 3 sequential steps. You notice, therefore. What do you do when you read therefore? You got to see what it's there for, right? And it connects to the prior passage. And the prior passage has its leading statement, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. Okay? And then there are a number of statements of why the wrath is revealed. Well, why is the wrath revealed? Well, we talked about one, the truth. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They suppressed the truth. Because that which is known of God has been rejected. Not only in the Gentile world, but also, in Israel. Think about all the times God has had to unleash a little wrath on them. And then in verse 24, you come back to wrath. Therefore, God gave them over. God gave them over to their lusts of their hearts, impurity, that their bodies might be dishonored among them. The first indication, this is John MacArthur, I saw in a sermon that I watched his. The first indication in a society of the wrath of abandonment, what do you think that is? In society, what do you think the first indication is of the wrath of God, the wrath of abandonment?
Acceptance of sin, chaos.
Sexual immorality.
Yeah.
And we've been fighting this for thousands of years. This is not a new concept. When man is abandoned by God, when society is abandoned by God, it operates only within the passions of their own heart. It operates in the lust of the heart, leading to impurity. That's exactly where we're at. You think that's a problem in the world today? And again, we saw that time and time again in the book of Judges. Paul wrote to a culture where homosexuality was accepted as part of life for both men and women. This was not an unusual thing. Kind of feels like the same acceptance that we have today. For 200 years, the men who ruled the Roman Empire openly practiced homosexuality, often with young boys. At the time that Paul wrote this letter, Nero was emperor. What do you know about Nero? This guy is not a great example to emulate. He took a boy named Sporus and had him castrated and then married him in a full-blown ceremony and brought him to the palace with a great procession All the crowds were there and made this boy his wife. Later, Nero lived with another man, and Nero was the wife. There's nothing new under the sun. Exactly. I couldn't believe that when I was reading that. And in the Roman Empire, specifically, tax approved homosexual prostitution and gave boys a legal boy prostitutes gave them a legal holiday. How's that? Yeah, we give we give them one. Yeah, I don't know if we'll be able to post this on the YouTube or not, Bart. Yeah, in modern culture, the practice reflects the abandonment of giving them up to uncleanliness, lust of their heart, to dishonor their bodies against themselves. You know, and when you look at, I go back to, it's abandonment, but it's also consequential. Okay, that's why I wanted to distinguish between the two. When you look at some of the statistics of that kind of lifestyle behavior, it's really staggering. You know what the average life expectancy of a male practicing homosexual is? Yeah, it's gotten a little better because we got some better drugs and stuff. It's about 48. Okay. And then 43% in polling said they've had over 500 partners. Only 1% can say that they had 4 or less. You get a real sense of the idea of how that this really is about sex, by and large. And Paul talks about the penalty of this conduct. It has within itself a penalty. That's the cause and effect.
Atheist, he's dead now, but one of them said, we have to believe in evolution because we want to have totally free sexual practices, and if there's a God, we're accountable to him.
Yeah. Save that thought. I've got that coming up in a little bit, but yeah, you're exactly right. So Paul speaks of this conduct and what it leads to. What does it lead to? God turning them over. You know, when you look at some of the other statistics, again, I have family and friends that practice this lifestyle. It's hard for me to even talk about it. Okay, we already talked about the life expectancy. It's 20 to 30 years less than someone who's not practicing that lifestyle.
Anybody watch Marlon Maddox, or anybody listen to Marlon Maddox back in the 80s? He had a guy that was often called to go to testify, but he took all the homosexual newspapers that were available at that time, and he categorized death, and the risky deaths were huge, like even car wrecks and all kinds of things. It's a risky lifestyle.
Yeah.
But at the time, he said, I think it was 32 years versus 88 or 86 for a heterosexual man. And if the heterosexual man was married, it was 88. I mean, it's not 30 years. It's way bigger than that even.
Yeah, it doesn't end with just life expectancy. Chronic illnesses of any nature, they're 40% higher in that lifestyle. It's a consequence of violating nature's order. Sometimes it's the penalty of rebellion. Gave them over to their depraved minds. As further judgment, God gave them over to a debased. What do your translations say? Could be depraved. Anybody got debased? Dishonorable passions.
John, for years, had read through this, and it's describing this despicable behavior. But then I would get to the fact that God gave them over to a depraved mind as a result. And I'm looking at the beginning of this section and thinking, how much more depraved could it get? And within recent years, I began to form an idea.
More so. But the sad thing, A, I agree with you, but B, this isn't new. Been going on for thousands of years. The depravity of man, and especially when it comes to sex, is been going on for thousands and thousands of years.
Of this, can I use the word trend of mutilating body and children? I mean,
I'm trying to stay away from that one because I have a lot of
the
feelings about
depraved,
that.
but
But that's a depraved mind.
Depravity, yeah, begins to take.
I just
shape.
read an article yesterday about a little boy that was transitioned to a girl. They started the transition when he was 3. He's now 10 and he's a top runway model for some of these fashion shows. Who at 3? Oh, and by the way, his mother has since transitioned from being a woman to a man. Think that was any influence on him? You know, the word depraved or debased mind, regarding what your translation says. In the Greek, it means not passing the test. Depraved. It's often used to describe useless, worthless metals that have too many impurities in them. God has tested our minds and our hearts, and he's decided they're depraved. We're not passing the test. An old dead guy, Kenneth Woost, said this: the human race put God to the test for the purpose of approving him. Should he meet the specifications which are laid out for a God who would be to its liking, and finding that he did not meet those specifications, it refused to approve him as the God to be worshiped or have him in its knowledge. That's exactly what's happening. Instead of, it's not only God testing us, but we're testing God to see if he's real. Is he going to accept the way I want to live? And if not, we throw him out. Sounds like our culture, doesn't it? You know, we live in a time where people think and believe that if something is legal, it's not sin. Think of any examples of that? Yeah. Gay marriage. And then it goes the opposite way. If you do speak truth, they're in Canada, they're yanking preachers right out of pulpits for teaching on a topic that goes against what the society thinks is right or wrong. Just because something is legal doesn't make it right. And we seem to, you see the courts and you see why people are so upset when there's a court ruling that doesn't go the way they want it to. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes.
President Trump was
Yeah.
able to appoint over 300
Well,
judges, and we're getting a lot of.
thank goodness. I mean, think about this. If Trump never gets in the office again, he was in long enough to sway the Supreme Court in a mighty way. Yeah. So do you think God has abandoned the US? Why or why not?
I heard Bob Russell talk about this in regards to Sodom and Gomorrah. He said that, and I don't quote him just right, but he said that he could not find 10, I think it was 10 righteous men. And so that's why he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And he said, our job, we won't be president, who we elect to be president is not as critical as we being a righteous man. That's the only thing keeping the United States from being taken over.
Yeah, anyone else? Terry?
No, I do not think God has abandoned the United States. And the first reason I think that is because if he had, he would not have intervened. In 2016, he would have let what the globalists already had planned for the United States and the world carry out, and we would already be destroyed. And I believe he intervened with the man who said, yes, I'll be your man. And that they're working on a plan to save America and the world, because if America falls, the world falls.
Mari?
I think he definitely has taken his hand of blessing on this country for a very long time, before 9/11 even.
Yeah.
Actually, but again, when you read this passage, it's the pronouns are they, them, them. We, the saints, are the only reason this nation is still
That's right.
here. Actually, I think.
Who's Paul writing this letter to?
The
Right.
saints, also back in Psalm 2, you know, it's a great song where it says that, you know, why do the nations rage and devise vain things, foolish things? They want God's restraints off them. And that's what we're seeing in our country. They don't want to hear about God.
Yeah.
And then it says God sits in the heavens and laughs. So he's in total control, which is a blessing for us.
Thank God.
Comforting. Yeah.
Well, God is always going to win. Doesn't mean the, countries of Western society are going to win. But
I think it's significant that this whole passage, beginning in verse 20, starts with the fact that we deny he is the creator.
Yeah.
Once that happens, all the arguments against these forms of behavior disappear.
they disappear because there's no accountability.
That's right. If God created us a certain way and not another way, well, then we have a reason for his limitations upon our behavior. And we can argue that this is wrong and we can keep from doing it. But if he is not our creator, if he did not create the universe in a certain way and not another, and we begin to worship the creation instead of the God who created us, then there's just nothing to
And
hold
there's
back
no
this
absolute
progression.
truth. There's no absolute truth. You can do whatever you
Yeah.
want.
Bart's point, the homosexual community didn't come up and said, God made me this way. They even said, God, that part, that they can't prove it. They tried, they can't prove it.
Worse than that, they claim it to be a fact. It's like the fact of evolution. Every time you hear about this, it's always labeled as a fact. So you have no argument against me because I've just stated a fact to you. That's the way it goes. But there's no denying where our society is at when it comes to sexual immorality. I'm going to show you something. And so God gave her, I forgot to switch to the slide, gave her the vile passions, exchanged the natural use. But I want to show you this slide. How much of the internet consists of pornography? First of all, adults 18 to 35 who watch porn at least weekly, 87%. Think about that. Percentage of US adults, men 18 to 35 who watch porn at least weekly is 87%. With women, it's only 28.5, only 28.5. Okay. Well, I got this from a place called Statista. So they chart and do everything. They're a data mining company. This 4%, you know how many websites there are in the world? Best guesstimate is 1.2 billion websites. 4% of them are porn sites. Now, that's a small percentage, but that's a big number. It's a big number. Web searches. 13% of all web searches have to deal with pornography. And then mobile searches on your phone. Why do you think it's higher on mobile devices? 20%. What's that? Privacy, exactly. You can do it in darkness. You can do it in your car. You can do it in the bathroom, anywhere. You have privacy with a mobile device that you may not have with a desktop or a laptop. That's staggering to me. I think I've given you this statistic before, but I used to get all these marketing statistics when I was working. Of the top 10 websites in the world, 3 of them are porn sites. Now think about, if I asked you to name top websites, think about it. You're probably thinking Google and Amazon and all these different places. 3 of the top 10 are pornography sites. 2 of those sites, they're among the most trafficked sites in the United States. One averages 690 million views a month. The other one averages 640 million views a month. That's a lot. You know how many views Netflix gets a month? 540 million. Those porn sites are getting more traffic than Netflix is. Zoom, less traffic than these websites. Isn't that amazing? That's staggering to me.
I did a little research about a year ago for a couple of study.
Mhm.
And at that point in time, when this is reviewed, the porn industry online was a $9.8 billion industry. And it's 40 million Americans regularly visit porn sites.
Regularly.
Regularly.
That's right. You know, I heard this, it was here at Southeast, it was a men's Bible study. And this number here is amazing. You know what group of men is the fastest growing group for the use of Viagra? Men in their 20s. Men in their 20s is the fastest growing group. Why do you think that is? Because their brain has been wired about pornography. Your wife can never do the stuff that you're looking up online, and your brain starts to process that. All right.
Heroin and drugs next to guys on porn all the time, and their brain was changed from the normal.
And that's not zoning.
You know, the tragedy behind all this is the number of women who are being subjected to all this, and they think it's okay. And campsites and, you know, all that other
Yeah.
stuff that's out there, there's millions and millions, and they get younger and younger all the time, who are being subjected and used and abused, and they think it's just a money-making process.
Right.
It's just sex, it's no big deal,
Yeah.
and the damage.
Turns out it's a big deal. Yeah, that's the lie. It's a big deal. And those sites I was talking about, I purposely didn't name them. But those sites, they're the fastest growing websites, except for one, Amazon. So people are evidently shopping and surfing porn. Those are the things that they're doing. 2.6, they grow 2.6% month on month. Not year to year, month to month. Amazon grows at about 7%. Think about that.
Could say the percentage of women who are involved physically.
Oh, yeah, this number is just people viewing. And that's only 18 to 35. That's right. It doesn't take into account the number of women that are wrapped up in that industry. Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Let's move on because I'm tired of looking at that slide. It can be depressing. Also in verse 28 said they do things that are not proper. They're not moral. So immorality goes in every direction. And now you can't find your way back because the mind's so corrupt. I couldn't believe that Viagra stat. 20-year-olds, you're at the peak of your physical health in your 20s, right? And you got that kind of problem. And they're probably not making that connection between the porn surfing you're doing. Let's, Bart, let's read this verse. Now, I got to tell you before we get to this point, anybody ever see Christmas Vacation? Remember when Clark gets his Jelly of the Month Club thing and he goes on his little rant? Every time I read this verse, that's kind of what I'm thinking about is Clark Griswold going on this rant. So you think about that. Bart, let's go ahead and read verses, let's read 29 to, well, let's just read up to here. I took the numbers off.
They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They are senseless, faithless, heartless, and ruthless.
Can't you just picture Clark doing that? They're senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless. I could just see Clark doing that. They disobey their parents. I don't even know how that one got on the list compared to everything else that's on there. Although it was a capital offense in the Old Testament. But that's quite a list. God haters. Let's read this again. Envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They're gossips, slanderers, God haters. Insolent, arrogant. This is where I start slipping into Clark. Insolent, arrogant, boastful. They invent ways to do evil.
The one thing that you see in our society so much is all the euphemisms. Abortion is healthcare.
Oh,
It goes on and on and on. Now the spin, it's not fornication, it's something else. It's not adultery, it's an
Yeah.
affair. It's not homosexuality, it's gay.
Not sin, it's a mistake.
Yeah.
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 To make it seem like it's not really what it is.
Did you know when Bill Clinton was being impeached? Why was he being impeached? For you young guys, what was Bill Clinton? Because he had that affair with Monica Lewinsky, right? No. Do you know that his approval numbers actually went up during that time? His approval numbers went up. Why do you think that is?
It's behavior enhanced.
Because all the sinners identified with a leader had the same problem they had. What's that? Yeah, exactly. You should have loved Trump. He was Clinton on steroids when it comes to that part of his life. But think about that. Think about that. Of course they liked Bill Clinton more. Because he was just like the rest of them. And who wants to be more comfortable with a leader than people that can identify to the same sin that he has? You know, we've kind of become the Jerry Springer show in this country, where it's so bizarre and so corrupt. He laughed at, conventional corruption. I can't believe some of the things I read. I read some things at Pepsi. I only read headlines. I don't even read some of these articles. Okay. Because the headlines alone tell you what's going on. Now you get on Drudge Report or some other place and just read some headlines. I cannot believe that thing I told you about the 3-year-old being transitioned. That's from a headline. Yeah, I did read the first paragraph to believe what I was reading in the headline. But it's crazy. Media, TV. How do you think TV is since you were a kid? Not only do you have more than 3 or 4 channels, you got 400 channels of garbage. We've come a long way since the Dick Van Dyke Show, Leave It to Beaver, and some of the other stuff. It's nonsense. Mike.
What I have is, I always overestimate my ability to deal with knowledge. We think if we just have knowledge, we'll be better. And I think about a friend of mine that had video and audio in some of his offices, and he could hear what his employees were saying about him. He had to take it out.
Oh, man. I gotta tell you, as a guy who led a lot of people for a long time, I wouldn't want that ability.
Our ability to deal with knowledge, even when it's the truth, we just can't deal with it. And I think,
I mean, some of the, just music, which is I grew up in a home with music. To this day, mom with her Alzheimer's, you start playing a song from her era, she knows every word. They had a singer come into Story Point, he's singing these old songs, and the guy noticed she's sitting in her wheelchair and she is singing every single word of those songs. You think they're going to be doing that with rap music years from now? Some of the stuff that gets said in hip hop and rap music alone would just make your skin grow. I can't believe this stuff is allowed to even be on radio. And it's tragic. We've come a long way from I Want to Hold Your Hand to where we're at today. And my grandfather thought that was garbage back in '64. Yeah. But this is what happens when God abandons a society. So why does God do it? Why does God abandon society? Go back to verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness. That's why he does it. And it's already permeating our culture. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And there's no surer or sadder evidence of a corrupted, wicked society than one that will not tolerate anger against sin. Let me say that again. Our society won't tolerate anger against sin. What happens if you try to confront somebody with their sin, or if you, heaven forbid, you called it sin? You're a hater, you're judgmental, yeah. Since when did not agreeing with somebody become hate? That's the test today. If you don't agree with me, forget the fact that you don't agree with me. But if you don't agree with someone, you must hate me. Must I? If that were the case, I wouldn't talk to half my family. No, I'm serious. Karen.
You can do any vile and wicked thing you want, The thing you cannot do is say something wrong.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah, you read some of these, you have a few conservative celebrities who will speak up and say something, and boy, do they get attacked right away.
I think it's particularly true with sexual sin.
Oh, yeah.
You can't say, although it does have its limits, I guess so far we haven't said that, although some people in our culture are saying pedophilia is okay. But we haven't gotten to bestiality. So I think there still are some limits, but those, look at Romans. People invent ways to become more perverse.
Yeah.
Maybe step it down.
No, but now you're right. I mean, just think about it. I can't believe some of the things that you see and hear about that they're actually happening. But again, this is not new. This has been going on for thousands of years. It's just we have more knowledge of it because of the internet and media coverage and everything else. And then the media drops right in on it. They approve of all that nonsense. I saw a few of these things I want to share. The truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth. That's true. No one is hated more than he who speaks the truth. I think that's where we're at. People hate the truth for the sake of whatever it is that they love more than the truth. That's pretty profound. They love truth when it shines warmly on them, and they hate it when it rebukes them. That's Augustine. We don't want people to question our truths. They silence truth speakers. I already told you that they're yanking preachers out of pulpits in Canada. They see the light, they hate the light, they run to darkness, despising the light, condemning the light. That's where we're at. And suppressing the truth has to imply that we have a truth. Think about that. God does exist. He's made his existence known to us. You go back earlier in Romans 1, it says, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God has made it evident to them. Since the creation of his world and his invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are what? Without excuse. And in Romans 2, it says that God has written his word on every man's heart. Deep down, people that are trapped in those kind of lifestyles and suppressing the truth, deep down, they know it's wrong because it's written on every man's heart. And then lastly, in verse 32, although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but they give hearty approval to those who practice them. That gives me great pause right there. It's along with Matthew 7, it's one of the scariest verses in the Bible there. And those who approve of them. Where does all the violence, immorality, cruelty, degradation come from? It happens when men abandon the true knowledge of God. They exchange the truth of God for a lie. I want to wrap up with something I saw from John MacArthur. John says, I was thinking through a couple years ago and thought that man likes to live with 5 dominant lies. And they're comfortable to the sinner. First is life is random. If life is random, there is no God. Everything came from randomness and happenstance. And if there is no God, there is no accountability. Life is random. That's huge. Truth is relative. I hate this phrase. Truth is truth. By definition, there's only one thing that can be true. 2 + 2 is 4. Don't tell me it's 5 and then act like I'm crazy because I believe that. No absolutes, no standard. You just kind of go with the flow. And if there's no absolute truth, you can do whatever you want. I like this one. People are basically good. How many people believe that? Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
biggest differences between Catholicism and Protestantism? Catholicism believes people are ready.
Yeah, they do.
And therefore they can work their way towards salvation.
That's right. Basically, my dad came to Christ literally 3 days before he died. Okay. But even when he was an agnostic his whole life, he would recognize that this was a load of crap. Okay. And he would tell you the story. You know, he goes, your brother, when he was 3, he got a metal fire truck for Christmas. And we have the whole family over for Christmas. And he picks up the fire truck and he walks over behind his 80-year-old grandmother and he raises it up and he's going to smack her in the head with that fire truck. Of course, my dad stops, grabs him, spanks him. And he says, now, where did he learn that behavior? Of course, years later, I tell him, exactly. Where did he learn that behavior? It's in him. He didn't have to learn it. It's in him. Goodness is taught. Yeah. Not that some people aren't good out of the womb. You have to train them less. But the propensity to be evil exists. It's there all the time. And to not acknowledge that is a lie in itself. I like this one. Everyone can change their own life. Take charge, become the person you want to be, have the power to be whatever you want. That's a lie. Telling your children you can do whatever you want to do. That may not be true. You know, MacArthur said, if you can't hold a tune in a bucket, you're never going to hold a tune in a bucket. If you're tone deaf, you're never going to be able to sing. So to tell a child who's tone deaf that you could be the greatest singer ever, that's a lie. What else about that lie?
Singing on these shows to see who the best singers are and stuff like that. Most people need to be slapped for telling their kids.
Yeah. MacArthur says it's a big lie. You can be everything you want to be. People tell their kids, you can be anything you want to be. Let them tell you, but if you let me tell you, if you're slow, you're slow. You know why my daughter didn't make the varsity team in field hockey when she was in high school? Your coach Flaz said, because you're too slow. You're not fast enough. Oh, honey, you can be anything you want to be, except faster, evidently. Alvin.
2 decades ago, JCPS had as their quote, anything that you can conceive, you can achieve. And that was 2 decades ago.
2 decades ago. You know, I gotta tell you.
What a lie. What a total
You were gonna say
farce.
something else. You're gonna say load or something.
What a total farce. And yet we're talking about educators who felt
Yeah.
like that was the epitome of understanding.
You know, I didn't become a Christian until I was 40. So it's 22 years ago. You know, and I didn't see any of these problems in society. Almost instantly after becoming a Christian, I'm like, oh my goodness. It's like a veil had been lifted from my eyes. And it's been that way ever since. I can't believe what I'm seeing. I can't believe the things I used to do or say. It's crazy. I mean, like,
Just so much of today is about feelings. I mean, it's almost like philosophical and logical and rationale has just been parked. It's just about what feels good. This is just doing something.
Yeah.
Somebody's to make them feel good. They'll let them, fall in the biggest pit. What you're gonna fall into once they realize what the truth is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Feelings. Morris Albert had a song called Feelings. The only hit he ever had. And the last one, the goal of life is self-satisfaction. Is that true? The goal of life is self-satisfaction. You're really after feeling good about yourself, being satisfied with who you are. That's the pop psycho culture that we're in. You just need to feel good about yourself. My daughter is an AFSP, prevention of suicide, and they kind of have some of those underlying themes about it. You can help yourself. You can do this. And if you can't, here's a 988 number you can call for help. Okay, well, if you can really do all those things, you wouldn't need the 988 number. It's a blatant kind of self-illusion. Life is random. Truth is relative. People are basically good. Everyone can change their own life as they choose. And the goal of life is self-satisfaction. You know what? The truth is the exact opposite of all those. And yet you guys all recognize these are leading lies in society. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. The truth is the opposite. God is sovereign. And nothing is random. The Bible is absolute truth. There is a standard for truth. God owns it. All people are basically sinful. We're born with a sin nature. That's why a 3-year-old wants to hit his grandmother with a steel truck. Only Christ can change your life. And last, selfish submission to Jesus Christ is the goal of life. Selfless. Did I say selfish? That doesn't work quite as well, does it? Selfless submission to Christ. Yeah. So the society's got it completely wrong. Go back to verse 21. Because they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. And we're talking about collectively as a society. But that's Paul's warning to the Romans. And it's evident. I think we can see that in society today. Music, television, movies. You know how many movies we've been to in probably the last 3 years, and this isn't just because of COVID. I think one. I think I went to see Top Gun Maverick. Sorry, couldn't miss that one on a big screen. But there's nothing out that appeals to me. You know, why would you want to go see something? Ken?
We went to visit my son out in Arizona a year or two ago, and he had Netflix. We don't have any kind of TV stuff. It took us an hour to find anything that we wanted to watch. And
Yeah.
there's hundreds and hundreds of choices.
Yeah.
There's nothing there that was
And
interesting.
Netflix started off at $7 a month, and now it's 20 for the same garbage. It's crazy. Oh, it's way more birds. Any questions, Mari?
I'm so grateful for you to teach this today. I think we need reminded, but what keeps going through my head the whole time is it's in the church, it's in the church, it's in the church. Today, the churches aren't speaking about this.
No, they're
So
not.
we've embraced the culture into our churches.
Yeah.
So now, I remember, goodness, it must have been 30 years ago, David Wilkerson had a pastor's conference. There were about 700 pastors, and I remember him saying, when I asked them if they struggled with pornography, or the majority of hands went up.
Oh, pastors.
These were pastors, John. This was 30 years ago. Yes.
You know, it's, I do want to close with one thing, so we don't leave here in a great big bummer. Bart, did you have a comment?
Yeah. One of the problems is we live with the fruit of a civilization based on biblical values. And we have changed our religion, we've changed our view of the world, but we're still enjoying those values. So most people will laugh at what you've just taught.
Right.
And it takes people who are committed to Christ to see it. And it reminds me of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was warning the people that if they continued to serve other gods, if they continued on the way they were going, that there would be disaster ahead. And they laughed at him. They threw him in a pit. They imprisoned him and did all kinds of things. And sure enough, eventually, they were eating their own young and starving under siege from Nebuchadnezzar. The city was torn down. They were carried off into captivity or slaughtered. And I think the problem is we don't realize how unpleasant a pagan world is.
Yeah.
But we're headed there. And I think this is what warns us against it.
Yeah, I want to just close with one thing. So I went to the doctor a couple weeks ago and had blood work done, and praise God, my numbers are getting better. But when I was talking to my doctor, I said to her, I have a son-in-law that I'm worried about. He's a big guy, he's 6'4". He's probably, he's way overweight, and his blood numbers are starting to, creep up, and I'm asking her. I thought it was kind of ironic when I got in the car. What can I do? What can I say to try to help him? Well, it reminded me of evangelism. There's nothing you can say. Okay, yeah, but you know what she said to me? The perfect answer. You model it before him. And it's the same with evangelism. What do we do with a culture like this? You have to model something different than what's going on in their lives. And that's where it gets tough, because sometimes we're looking for the magic words. What do I say to this person who's steeped in this sin? It's nothing you can say. Okay, because nothing, because I know when I was way overweight, now I'm just a little overweight. But when I was way overweight, my mom used to talk to Patsy all the time. Can't you get him to lose weight? And Patsy's answer always, no, I can't. You got to want to do it yourself, or you're never going to do it. And the same goes for this kind of sin. The same goes for evangelism. You have to just model it. What are the greatest commandments? Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. And you can only do that by modeling it. You can't lecture somebody into changing their behavior. Okay?